With most of the chaotic and over-the-top dogs that I've worked with, I've learned that the most effective changes don't just come from training alone. In fact, they've come from kickstarting regulation. And honestly, I believe that's because a lot of behavioral problems aren't actually training issues, they're more lifestyle issues. And this is what I want to get into a bit more today. But before we get into the good stuff, let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Junior, behavior nerd and founder of Paws of Wisdom, where I help overwhelmed owners make sense of their chaotic and over-the-top dogs through a regulation-first lens. And today I want to talk about why kickstarting regulation is the first change that I make whenever I start working with a more chaotic or over-the-top kind of dog. So firstly, to understand why regulation comes first, we need to understand what dysregulation is. And even though it might feel like it, dysregulation isn't your dog trying to be difficult, it isn't your dog being stubborn. Dysregulation is simply what happens when a dog's internal system gets too overloaded, too chaotic, too noisy. It's essentially the slow and gradual build-up of stress, frustration, or arousal, or all three, which is what I call the unholy trinity. Now, when these three stack up without any management, recovery, or regulation, the system struggles to cope with that stress and becomes overloaded. It becomes overwhelmed. And when that system gets overwhelmed and overloaded, then just like a volcano, as that pressure builds, there's nowhere for that pressure to go but outwards. And it goes outwards into behavior. The way I like to think about it is chaos on the inside leads to chaos on the outside. At first, it might look fairly small. We're talking overstimulation, restlessness, pacing around, difficulty really settling down, or looking like they're constantly switched on. But as that overload continues, as that pressure builds up, you can start seeing bigger changes in behavior, such as increased reactivity, impulsiveness, more unpredictable and chaotic behaviors. Dogs that generally seem harder to live with. You have to remember that dysregulation doesn't just come from a single moment. Dysregulation is a build-up, an accumulation of a system carrying more than it can handle. Now that you understand dysregulation, let's talk about why regulation actually comes first. And that's because a dysregulated dog struggles to do the exact things that we expect from them. They struggle to cope, they struggle to think, they struggle to make good choices. And until you actually address that dysregulation, that chaos, behavior change and training is always slower, it's always frustrating, and quite a lot of the time, it's very short-lived. Trying to build behavior change on top of dysregulation is like trying to build a house without a foundation. In the Bible, there's a parable about two people who built houses. One person built their house quickly. They didn't take their time to lay the right foundation, whilst the other took longer. They took their time to build a foundation. They dug deep. They made sure that foundation was strong before they built the house. And then one day a storm came, and the house that didn't have that foundation, the house that didn't have that solid grounding beneath it, was swept away in the storm. Whilst the other one, the one with the foundation, managed to withstand whatever came at it. Now, the outcome for this wasn't decided by the storm, but instead it was decided by the foundation. And I really like this because it can relate to everything, including regulation and our dog's foundations. Chaos is always going to be a part of a dog's day-to-day life, no matter how hard we try. Stress, frustration, arousal, they're always bound to happen. But without a regulated baseline, or without a routine that allows regulation, the unholy trinity always finds a way to reign supreme. And when it does, chaos follows behind. And when the system is chaotic on the inside, it inevitably leaks outwards into behavior. And I found this is why a lot of owners find themselves stuck. It's not because they're not putting in the effort, but because they're trying to fix behavior or add training or more exercise without first stabilizing the system underneath it, without fixing and building that foundation. And this is exactly why the first thing that I change with these dogs isn't asking for more. It's changing the lifestyle that created the dysregulation in the first place so we can kickstart regulation, so we can reset and rebuild that foundation. This means reducing chaos. This means reducing the unholy trinity, the stress, the arousal, the frustration, so the system can finally stabilize and start balancing itself back out. But to do this, we have to lower the load instead of continuously adding to it. Sometimes the fastest way forward isn't by pushing harder. It's creating the conditions where regulation can actually grow. So why does this create such massive change, you ask? Well, because regulation allows dogs to think clearer. It allows dogs to make better choices. It allows dogs to recover faster, to cope better. It makes life smoother and more predictable, both for you and your dog. And one of the biggest things I've noticed is that some behaviors dramatically reduce and some even disappear because a lot of these so-called unwanted and bad behaviors weren't actual problems to fix. They were coping mechanisms for that chaotic lifestyle. And then suddenly you have a dog that needs less work because their lifestyle is no longer fighting against them, it's working for them. And finally, one last thing that I want to clear up is this. A regulation first approach does not mean that we don't train our dogs. We absolutely still train our dogs, but by focusing on regulation first, you can create a solid foundation that everything else can finally rest upon. And not only that, but it can withstand what comes at it. When chaos gets thrown at the system, when the storm comes, that foundation is what keeps everything together. Once regulation is in place and you have a dog who can listen better, who can make better choices, who can follow your guidance, training becomes so much easier. Management becomes so much easier. And life becomes so much easier. So, there you have it. This is exactly why with every chaotic or over-the-top dog that I work with, the first thing that I look at is regulation. Creating better habits and routines, looking at meeting their real needs, and building a foundation that training and change can actually rest upon. Because when the lifestyle supports the system, everything gets easier. And if you want to learn more about regulation, stress, and why your dog might behave the way they do, then check out my regulators community. I've linked it down in the description. It's a space for burned out and overwhelmed owners to make sense of their chaotic and over-the-top dogs' behavior through a regulation-first lens. Inside you'll find the regulators resource file, you'll find a deep dive library and more educational resources that help you actually understand what's going on underneath the chaos. But if you're ready to move from understanding to actual action, you'll also find the Paws of Wisdom Detox protocol inside the community as well. That's my structured step-by-step system designed to help you actively reduce daily chaos, reset your dog's baseline, lower the unholy trinity, and create better habits and routines to start creating real and noticeable change. And if you're looking for deeper personalized guidance and accountability, make sure you check out the Regulators Academy, where I help owners build regulation-first systems tailored to their dog and their life. And finally, thanks for watching. If this helped you understand your dog just a little bit more, make sure you hit that like button so that more owners can discover this. And let me know in the comments, what else are you struggling with, or what other topics would you like to know more about? And that covers today's video. Until next time, friend, see you soon.